Jungkook pushed open the door to their home, feeling the sense of warmth that always greeted him after a long day at work. As he stepped into the hallway, he noticed Wine moving around, wiping the counters in the kitchen. His eyebrows raised slightly. She was still recovering from the childbirth, and though it had been a few weeks, he knew she was still far from her full strength. Her movements were slow, hesitant, and it made his chest tighten at the way she winced. Wine, he called, walking closer. The second she heard his voice, she froze. Then, as though nothing was wrong, she turned, a bright smile plastered on her face. Wine, you're home, she said, walking towards him with a smile that seemed just a little too forced. Jungkook smiled back. He opened his arms, and she came into them without hesitation, resting her head against his chest. He held her tightly, breathing in the scent of her hair, but his eyes drifted back to her hands, which were trembling slightly. He looked at her hand, and his eyes widened when he noticed a small burn mark on the back of her hand, red and swollen. Jungkook, Wine, what happened here? He said in a panic, pulling back just enough to grab her wrist gently. She quickly pulled her hand away, shaking her head with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Wine, it's nothing. I was just clumsy in the kitchen. She chuckled forcefully. He frowned, tilting his head as he said, that doesn't look like nothing. Her smile faltered for a second, and she tried to change the subject. She pulled her hand back from him and she smiled. Wine, forget it. How was your day? Did everything go well at the office? He noticed she was hiding something from him, but as she didn't want to tell him, he didn't force her much. Jungkook, it was fine, but let's talk about that later. I want to see Hana. Her face lit up at the mention of their daughter. Wine. Of course, let's go to the bedroom together. Together they made their way to the bedroom, and the moment Jungkook saw his little girl, his heart melted. Hana was wide awake, her big brown eyes shining with happiness as she lay in her crib, tiny fists waving in the air. Jungkook, I still cannot believe my eyes sometimes. He whispered to Wine, making his way to pick Hana up carefully and swinging her in his arms. Wine stood beside him, watching with a soft smile as he bounced her gently. Wine, she has your eyes, right? Wine said, leaning against him, their little family huddled together in the quiet of the room. Jungkook, and your smile, Jungkook added, pressing a kiss to Hana's tiny forehead. Jungkook, she is perfect because she is our daughter. Wine laughed and took her from his arms. Wine, it's time for her to sleep now. Jungkook, why? Let me play with her for a little while. I just came home. Wine, no, Daddy, I want to sleep, she said in a mocking tone while making a pout, as if she were speaking in place of Hana. Jungkook froze for a second as he looked at her, then he smirked. Are you seducing me right now? Wine blushed and sat on the bed. Go now, she needs to sleep. Jungkook, okay then, I better go, because after she sleeps, we need to sleep together as well, he said with a smirk, making Wine laugh. Hana laughed too as she sensed the happiness in the environment, making them both melted. The next day, Jungkook left for work, but he couldn't focus. His thoughts kept drifting back to Wine and the burn mark she had had. If she ain't going to tell him, he decided to find out what was going on himself. He decided to go home earlier without telling anyone and see for himself what was wrong. When he arrived, the house was quiet, but as he stepped inside, he heard voices. His mother's voice, sharp, cold, and Vine's much softer, which was barely audible. Creeping quietly towards the kitchen, Jungkook froze when he saw what was happening. His mother stood, towering over Vine, her arms crossed, an ugly sneer on her face. You can't even handle a simple task like cooking? What good are you if you can't even bear a son? You have failed as a wife. Jungkook's eyes widened. He didn't have to see or hear anything to know what was happening. He immediately stormed inside the kitchen, shouting, "What the hell are you saying, Mom?" Vine, visibly exhausted, was struggling to hold back tears. Her hands were shaking as she scrubbed the floor, still weak from her recovery. She looked above as soon as she heard Jungkook's voice. Both women froze. His mother turned startled, but her expression quickly shifted to one of victims. Jungkook's mom. "Jungkook, I'm doing what's necessary. This girl can't even give you an ear." "Jungkook, you're not saying another word, Mom." Jungkook interrupted, his voice low but firm, the kind of tone that left no room for argument. He walked over to Vine, kneeling down beside her. His hand gently cupped her face, and he could see the tears she had been holding back brimming in her eyes. Her breath hitched as he touched her. "Jungkook, are you okay?" he asked softly. Vine nodded, but it was weak, uncertain gesture. His heart ached as he helped her stand up to her feet. His hand tightened because of her weak form. Then, with a deep breath, he turned to his mother. "Jungkook, before being an ear, she is my child. I don't care if Hana is a boy or a girl. She is my daughter, and I love her just as she is." And Vine? His voice softened as he glanced at his wife. "Jungkook, Vine has given me the greatest gift, our child. She doesn't need to prove herself to anyone." Vine looked back in Jungkook's eyes. His eyes, the unwavering love she saw in them, made her tears fall down. Her grip on his hand tightened, and he hugged her when he saw her crying. His mother opened her mouth to say something back, but Jungkook cut her off. "Jungkook, I won't tolerate you treating her this way. I didn't expect this from you at least," he said while patting Vine's hair. Jungkook's mom. "She came between us, didn't she? I was always afraid that—" "Enough, Mom," he shouted. "Jungkook, you're the one coming between us right now. You still think you're right and she is wrong?" Jungkook's mom. "Of course I am. Don't you think you need an ear? You tell me. How a mere girl will be able to handle the whole empire?" Jungkook took a deep breath, almost wanting to not explain anything to his mother. "Jungkook, which era are you living in, Mom? And it's okay if she can't handle an empire. I never wanted an heir. I only wanted a child of mine." Jungkook's mom. "What era are you living in, son? We can't bear to be soft in these days. If she can't give us an heir, you might start looking for other girls." Jungkook stared at his mother for a few seconds before he took a deep breath to stop himself from raging out. "Jungkook, I will talk to you later, Mom, but just know that this is our home, and I will always stand by her." The silence that followed was thick with tension. His mother looked at him, anger and disbelief flashing in her eyes, but she said nothing. With a final huff, she turned and stormed out, the door slamming behind her. Jungkook let out a long breath, turning back to Wine. Jungkook, I'm sorry. I didn't know what else to say. I'm really sorry. I should have seen this sooner. But Wine shook her head, a small, grateful smile on her lips. Wine, it's not your fault. Jungkook wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. Jungkook, I love you, Wine. I will always love you. And I need you to trust me, even if it's about my mother. You need to tell me everything you're going through from next time, he said, firmly pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Jungkook, you and Hana are my world. I'll never let anyone hurt you, he said, looking in her eyes. Vine chuckled softly, resting her head against his chest. Vine, you sound like a knight wearing a shining armor. Jungkook, well, I do look pretty good in a suit. Jungkook teased, getting a laugh from her. Fine. Maybe I should call you Sir Jungkook from now on. They both laughed and he hugged her tighter. Fine. What will you do about your mother? Jungkook. I will explain to her later. Don't worry. I know everything now. I will sort it out. Let's go to Hana now. Fine. She needs to sleep. His eyes widened. That's not gonna happen today. I even came home earlier because of this. She laughed and they went to the bedroom.